episode 6 of the David Bernard podcast. I'm along with meteorologist Zach Fradella, and we have a lot to talk about today. I've been waiting to do this interview for some time. We're going to be talking to Collin Arnold of Orleans Parish Emergency Management, and we have a lot to talk to him about, including what happened yesterday. This is being recorded on May 13th, and yesterday we had a tornado in Orleans Parish, of all things, something that's really not that common, but it does occur from time to time. Zach?
Yeah, I mean, like we were just talking about it, since this is the first tornado to actually impact Orleans Parish since 2019, so it's 2 full years that we've gone without an actual tornado recorded in the parish. Now, it happens pretty frequently all across southeast Louisiana, but this one tracked right over the heart of the city. I mean, right into downtown. Some damage was reported even at City Hall. So an interesting track and fast moving, one of those crazy fast moving tornadoes.
It was really fast. In fact, here's a little background on what happened. And of course, we can compare it to 2017, the New Orleans East tornado, the strongest tornado on record to hit Orleans Parish. And according to the Weather Service, if we go back to 2000, so over the last 20 years, there's been 10 tornadoes in Orleans Parish proper. So that would mean about every other year. Now, 99% of them have been like what occurred yesterday, an EF0 tornado, not like what happened in 2017, which was an EF3 tornado. They estimated the winds 150 miles per hour with that particular tornado. And, you know, the thing that's so scary about what happened yesterday, and of course the New Orleans East tornado, is the damage potential. If we go back to the New Orleans East tornado, that funnel started developing right before the Industrial Canal. The wall cloud was over Metairie, it was moving east, and that funnel dropped and hit the ground as it went east of the Industrial Canal and south of Interstate 10 along Chef Highway. So it did move through at least the lower populated areas of New Orleans East. But you can imagine if that tornado of that magnitude was on the ground in Metairie, in Mid-City, along Interstate 10 in New Orleans East, what the potential could have been.
I mean, it's crazy to think of it like that. We've talked about this many times with that EF3 tornado. If it dropped to the ground maybe 3 or 4 miles earlier, I mean, the devastation would have been, you know, almost catastrophic in a sense. And thankfully, with both of these tornado events, no deaths. And that's, you know, but they're two totally different things. You know, with an EF3 during the middle of the day, we could track it, we could see it. This thing was rain wrapped, and it happened in a matter of seconds. Everybody that was interviewed yesterday said 1 second it was blowing like crazy, and the next second it was over with. And that goes to show you how fast these things can occur. And we always talk about this. When a tornado warning is issued, don't try and go outside and record it. Everybody wants to do that nowadays, and chances are here, you're not going to see it.
It was incredible. Here's the backstory on what happened for folks that may want to know what was going on. Generally, you know, I work the nights Monday through Friday. Shelby Latino works the mornings. And so when we have this overnight severe weather, I stay till about 2 in the morning. She comes in, picks up the coverage from there. The same thing you do with Nicandra on the weekends. You guys split the mornings and the nights for the severe weather coverage. And then, of course, we bring in extra help when needed. And so I was leaving the station. Shelby was coming in. The line of storms were moving in from the river parishes. There were no warnings on this. We had a couple of flood advisories out. There were a couple of storms earlier in the evening, which is why I want to stick around, that kind of had these notches on them when they were in Assumption Parish and just west of St. James. And I thought, well, things could get a little suspicious on the leading edge of this line of storms. So literally, I leave the station. Shelby comes into work. I get to my house, and about 5 minutes after I get to my house, I hear this roar. It was, and I knew it was strong wind. It did not last long. It maybe lasted a minute at most. I don't even know if it lasted that long. And to be quite honest, I was exhausted. And so even my meteorological curiosity couldn't get to me, and I went to sleep. So I did not know until the next morning what had transpired, but that tornado track had gone about a mile north of my house. So what I had was probably some 50-mile-per-hour winds that suddenly blew through my neighborhood, which we know now were closer to 85-mile-per-hour winds. But the track went right over the station, and the Kentwood building, I drive by that on the way home at night, where the roof peeled off of it. So the tornado was about 15 minutes behind me. Kind of a scary situation.
And we've looked at the velocities on it, and it tightened up right over, the Carrollton neighborhood. It tightened up there, came right across Fox 8, even though we had no damage here, but right down the street, that Kentwood building saw some damage, and then right through downtown. And then eventually it made it to Algiers Point, but lifted before ever making it to St. Bernard Parish. But it's a classic example of when you have these squall lines, they could be producing absolutely nothing for miles and miles. And then all it takes is one little spin up, which we get quite frequently, and in the wrong place. And in this case, it was right over the city in the most populated area. And it does some damage. 85 miles per hour winds that fast with the tornado. We saw multiple areas that saw the power lines down, and huge trees, huge oak trees, just fall and just knocked right over.
And the telltale sign for me was our news director was taking pictures of the damage yesterday morning and went down to the Kentwood building, and part of the aluminum, the metal roof that peeled off, one piece of it got wrapped around the telephone pole, which is just really a classic damage signal you see when you're doing forensics, trying to determine if this is damaging straight line winds or if it was a tornado. It's probably a combination of both yesterday. There might have been some straight line wind damage in there as well. And these also might have been, kind of like a Gus NATO type situation. Tell us a little bit more about those.
Yeah, because it was so, when I say, I don't want to downplay any type of tornado because it was so weak. When you're talking about EF zeros along a line like that, it could have just been a strong wind gust that spun up a little bit faster right on that leading edge. And look, 80 miles per hour, 85 miles per hour tornado or 85 miles per hour winds, they're going to do about the same damage. But you mentioned it. A lot of the damage we saw with the actual metal roofing and all, it was twisted in a way. And that's one thing when the National Weather Service goes out there and they go out there for all of these damage reports, they determine, okay, well, if things are twisted, that's chances are that it was a tornado that did that, because tornadoes twist. We all know tornadoes twist, and that they actually twist the damage as they pick it up.
Okay, well, on that note, today we're going to talk to Collin Arnold, as we were discussing. He's director of the Office of Homeland Security and Emergency Preparedness for the city of New Orleans. Big job, and as we'll discuss with him, he has had a lot of challenges the last 2 years. In fact, just about anything I think you can throw at an emergency manager, he's had to face, whether it's from the building collapse at the Hard Rock to, of course, the pandemic, the hurricanes, and cyberware attacks, and everything else in between. So on that note, let's bring in Collin Arnold. Now we have our guest for the day, Collin Arnold with the City of New Orleans. He is Director, I say, of Emergency Preparedness, but of course the title now, Collin, is much bigger than that. It's the New Orleans Office of Homeland Security and Emergency Preparedness. But I'm kind of an old-fashioned guy. You guys are still doing what you've always done, right, despite the longer title?
Yeah, absolutely. And we just call it NOSEP. We love our acronyms, so we'll call it NOSEP for short.
I can't do on TV. People always want to put acronyms on. I'm always like, nobody in the public knows what those acronyms are. I don't even know what most of them are. Well, I got to tell you, I've been wanting to have you on the podcast for some time, because I don't know if there are many emergency managers in the country who, in the course of 24 months, have faced a building collapse, a significant building collapse in the heart of their central business district, a cyber attack on the city's infrastructure. We've had multiple hurricane threats, and of course, the pandemic. So obviously a lot to talk with you about today. But of course, how about timing? Yesterday, we had an EF0 tornado go through the middle of the city. How do things stand today on that, and how do you feel the city response was to it?
I thought the city's response was really good as far as, coordination, and probably for the same reasons that you just kind of ran through the list. We've had a lot of practice over the last 18 to 24 months. And so, it's funny, we do this whole workup for hurricane season, which is kind of ironic because really down here, hurricane season's a year-round kind of sport. We're constantly preparing in different ways for hurricane season. But the April-May timeframe is always that time where you're really doing a lot of training and planning, presenting things to the mayor, and kind of doing after action and just looking at your program. And we're doing this training, but really it's to the point right now where it's like, if you haven't gotten it by now, you may never get it, because we have been tested. And so yesterday, what you saw was a very combined and coordinated, response to what, fortunately, although damaging, turned out to be a relatively not a major incident, and no injuries, or obviously no one hurt, which is the first call I made at 3:00 in the morning, 2:45 in the morning, is anybody hurt? Any reports of injuries? And the answer was no. So you're seeing, you're going to see some debris for the next few days, and we're going to get that picked up. And you'd have seen some minor to moderate damage to some homes and cars, which we always are concerned about. But overall, it's worked out very well. And I would also give credit to our electricity utility, Energy New Orleans, for a real coordinated response and a quick response. We were down at about 300 people without power this morning from 10,000 yesterday.
Yeah, Zach, you were talking about this earlier before Collin came in, about the impacts of a tornado on an urban area, and just how fragile everything can be.
Yeah, and it doesn't happen that often. I mean, because you got to realize in the city is such a small point. But in this case, Collin, I mean, this thing went right through downtown, literally. It started in the Carrollton area, across the northern side of Uptown, and then right into downtown and Algiers Point.
Yeah, and we get with the Weather Service really quickly in these events. The last one we had significantly with damage was, I believe, right the day before Barry. We had some flooding, and there was a tornado that went down, basically down Wisner, kind of along Bayou St. John. And it's always amazes me just to see how they can just kind of drop down, do some damage, pop back up, drop down, and just make that track, like you said, right through downtown, and then jump the river and go over into Algiers. And that's what we're seeing right now is Carrollton neighborhood there around Pine and Cone, and in Algiers Point around Opelousas and Bounty. That's the two areas still that are still lingering with some power issues that will be fixed today, and was probably the most damage we saw of any particular area.
So we've got a ton of stuff to unwrap here, right? As I put forward to you, but let's kind of start with hurricanes. That's really our existential threat here in Southeast Louisiana. I mean,
right.
the one thing that we've seen before and is always the most immediate looming threat. And let's talk about this past season. And of course, we're going to be talking about this on our Weathering the Storm special, about how unique the issues were with Laura, Sally, and Zeta, and what the implications could have been for Southeast Louisiana. But let's start with Zeta. That was our big direct hit last year. It was our first hurricane since Isaac. So we went 8 years without a hurricane, which is really kind of getting a little bit on the outside of what you might expect as far as return frequency, as far as a Category 1 storm. What was it like once Zeta got here, in light of the fact of what we had already been facing for the last couple of months?
We take something different from every storm, and certainly Zeta was the one that, for us, highlighted infrastructure. You saw tremendous power outages after Isaac in 2012. At that time, the coordination between energy and the city, as far as tree trimming, was there, but maybe not completely solidified. That storm solidified that partnership that has continued for a decade, as far as our parks and parkways and Entergy working together to, while we enjoy our tree canopy that is amazing in this city, it also needs to be maintained, because it can do a lot of damage. The trees can do a lot of damage to power lines and wind. That Entergy also upgraded electrical infrastructure after Isaac because they had to. And so we believe that kind of paid dividends as far as restoration after Zeta, which talking like inside baseball, when you're dealing with a national presidential election and over 200 polling stations without power, most of the city without power, and just the conversations between the state and the city on getting power and energy back, getting power back, in order to have a presidential election 4 days after the storm. It was monumental, and we had a plan together and assets in place to actually provide generator power to every single polling station in the city if we had to. And fortunately, we did not have to use one. They were all staged out at UNO Lakefront Arena, ready to go. A lot of props to the state and to Entergy in particular for getting all of that together. But we ended up, they ended up being able to restore the power in most of the city enough to where every power on election day, which was just terrific.
Yeah,
and so when I look at Zeta, sorry.
No, I was just going to say, I didn't mean to interrupt, but I totally forgot about that aspect of the storm. I totally forgot that this was literally days before the presidential election. And so, I mean, no, just thanks for reminding me that. And just also how fragile the infrastructure is. I mean, that was really, I think what it really exposed is how much we rely on power even more now than 30 or 40 years ago in making everything in society actually function. Zach?
One thing I wanted to kind of to follow up on with Collin is, was that a plan that was already in place, or was that something y'all had to come up on the fly where you needed to get generator power to every one of those sites, one of those polling places, or is that something that was you already had that kind of in the works in the event that something catastrophic was to happen?
Well, I think Collin is frozen up for just a moment here. In fact, I'm going to take him out for just a moment and see if we can get him to dial back in. It might be the best way to get him to come back out. So we're going to go back to that in just a second. Let me see, Zach, if I can. No, I can't do it that way. So we'll keep it up like that, and hopefully Collin will get back with us in just a minute. But that was really the weakness in this whole thing, was the power situation and the fact, of how easily the power was lost across the area. So, Collin, I see you're back here.
I'm back.
Yeah, talk more about that. That's what I think Zach and I were trying to get across, is that, oh my gosh, it was just a category. Basically, it was a category 1 with category 2 gust over the city, and it was moving so fast. We're so reliant on power today. I try to stress this with people all the time, that the modern day hurricane has so many more implications than it did 30 or 40 years ago, because we rely on power for everything.
Yeah, and so it actually, as you just probably saw this week, they actually upgraded it to a category 3, which on the coast, which winds over 100 miles an hour, which makes it a major landfall. And fortunately over the city, the winds were less. But I think what was even more fortunate about Zeta was that it was extremely fast and dry, relatively dry. Our scenario that we're really focused on and are worried about is that Harvey type situation, where you have a category 3, even a lesser category, that is extremely wet with rain and causes us issues with our drainage and with flooding. And so Zeta was quick moving. The question about the plans, we get questions about plans a lot. All hazards plans are written in a way that you can adapt them when you need them. So while we didn't have a specific plan for it's going to be a national election and you need to have generators over 200 places around your city, we have plans that kind of assign responsibilities to different agencies, the fire department, secretary of state, from federal to state to local, that all kind of indicate, if something like this happens, a power issue, how can we address it? And so now, having gone through this, you have a basis to actually, kind of annex that out and say, like, this is a good election strategy if we have to have this type of situation during an election again. So it works out. COVID was similar. You have pandemic plans, but With everything going on over the last year, a lot of those plans were found to be not enough.
Yeah, Zach, why don't you address what Collin was saying, and let's talk about Laura and Sally. And I'm going to have Zach kind of talk about it from the meteorological standpoint of the rapid intensification during Laura, and then the slow movement of Sally and what those could have meant for our area. And then, Collin, you can kind of talk about what you guys were doing in the middle of those hurricanes.
Yeah, I mean, like Laura and Sally were basically the worst case scenarios for the city of New Orleans. And at one point, we were basically in the middle of the cone of both of them. But Laura would be a category 4 and New Orleans would be catastrophic. Doesn't matter how fast it's moving, really. And then Sally was supposed to be a slow moving category 2 that just crawled right into southeast Louisiana in the first days when the track was coming out. Slow moving means flooding. We know that. You just mentioned that about Harvey. And then catastrophic category 4 means, okay, you have all hazards on deck and you can have significant problems. You know, what from a preparation standpoint, I know all the storms probably blend together last year, but from the days ahead of Sally, the days ahead of Laura, I mean, were y'all prepared at this point where we could take a category, a significant major hurricane, or we could take a very slow moving storm?
So Laura and Marco, if you remember, was going to be the 1-2 punch. So that added a whole different dynamic of, is it even possible? And of course, it's rhetorical. The answer is yes, it is possible that we're going to get hit by a hurricane and then a day later get hit by another hurricane. And after the year we've had in 2020, it was kind of like, why wouldn't that happen? And it didn't. Marco fizzled off the coast, but Laura presented significant challenges that we looked at as far as exactly what you're saying. It was kind of the perfect recipe of wind and water that would be an issue for us. I will say that with Laura, we realized in a relatively, we had preparations done, and we're at the point now in the season when we're in the L's where we've already had a few dry runs of tropical storms and other subtropical things happening, that, we've got our things in position. We've got our assets lined up. We've already been going through COVID, so our emergency operations center has been activated. And so we felt comfortable with that. Fortunately, the timeline with Laura and the cone moved where it became pretty certain it was going to go to Southwest, which presented us a whole other issue with we're then working with the state and the federal government to help the people in Southwest Louisiana, our neighbors. So Laura became, as I said, we all get that kind of one takeaway from the storm. Laura became the sheltering storm. And so we ended up sheltering 12,000 people at one point in hotels, up to 40 hotels downtown in a non-congregate setting because of COVID. And so now that has been added to, as we mentioned, planning has been added to the state's overall sheltering plan because it did work. But obviously there was concerns when Sally was a factor that you've added 12,000 people to your city's population that may need assistance in evacuating. It added a significant challenge to what we were already doing. And I will say for me, Sally is that storm, as I think you said, Zach, people are like, they're all running together. I've had people tell me like, oh, I totally forgot about Sally. For me, Sally was probably the one that I was most concerned about last year because of the track, because of the amount of moisture in it. It looked kind of like a mixture between an Isaac and a Gustav on track-wise. And you look at the damage that it caused in Pensacola. The bridge is still out there. Another infrastructure type challenge. Sally would have been an issue for us, I think, just because of its track and what we were doing to assist our neighbors in Southwest Louisiana with sheltering.
I mean, that was
we were lucky with Sally.
I agree with you completely, Collin. The Sally storm stressed me out the most because we had slow movement, track uncertainty, and intensity uncertainty. I mean, Sally blew up at the last second as well, and here you have this meandering storm that could be kind of wobbling into the marshes of St. Bernard, which is just the absolute worst approach that we can have for Lake Borgne and for Lake Pontchartrain as far as water. So you brought up the Laura evacuees. I mean, this is what I'm talking about. Another layer, the exact scenario we were worried about at the beginning of the season. Everyone was doing their hurricane specials about how is COVID going to impact the hurricane season, and boom, there we had it. So you added 12,000 people to the city. How many people do we typically prepare for that might need assistance with evacuation? And is something like this cooked into the equation beforehand?
We plan for 35 to 40,000 New Orleans residents that will need assistance. And again, last resort, you have no other way to get out. Medical, mobility, financial, transportation constraints mainly. 35 to 40,000. So, our concern clearly was that we were going to add 12,000 to that number. Now, having said that, the 90% probably, about 90% of the evacuees that got here from Laura were mobile. They had vehicles. So we did have a little bit of reprieve, if you will, there, as far as if we did have to tell people to leave, they had transportation. But we still had people with medical challenges, mobility challenges in the hotels that we would have had to add to our number to get out. We did that. We actually added those people to our special needs registry that we keep for the city. And just in case we had to go and had to tell people for a mandatory evacuation and call for it, we'd have been able to identify where they were.
So let's shift gears here now and talk about the pandemic. As we were talking about at the beginning of the podcast here, we've had the cyber attack on the city. You had the building collapse with the Hard Rock. We've had the hurricanes. And then, of course, we had the pandemic. And so almost everything that an emergency manager can have thrown at them has been thrown at you the last couple of years. Obviously, we have things like terrorist attacks, and, we can get in all kinds of horrible things that, thank goodness, have not occurred as at the point in time. But the pandemic, that's something that most of us did not have a concept of, that we have not had a devastating global pandemic like this in a century. I'm sure these are things that you learn about and as you're training as emergency managers, but I have to believe until it actually happens, like with a lot of things, you don't really know what you're going to be up against.
It's absolutely true. Before we had H1N1, swine flu, and I guess that the nearest would have been Ebola, which occur in far-off areas of the world, and your chance to interact with that virus or that issue is not as great. And so the numbers were so much smaller when you were doing your planning for those different types of pandemic or medical type disease vectors that can possibly come into your city. When we started talking about the coronavirus, we were thinking small in those same numbers. We may have a hospital where 10 people show up, or that there may be a hotel with 100 people. It all just was irrelevant at that point once the true nature of this became evident, and once the just amount of sickness and death, unfortunately, particularly in the beginning, started occurring. It was clear that this is something that is going to affect the entire world, and that we were certainly not going to be immune from the effects from it. And then it became the issue of PPE, getting the communication out to the public. And I think that NOLA Ready is something that we're very proud of here. The ability of the public to tell them to social distance, mask up, get tested when it was testing, and now get vaccinated when it's time to get vaccinated. And it is time to get vaccinated.
Yeah, I mean, just to kind of think back on when all this was beginning, I am no expert on pandemics. I mean, I'll be honest with you on that.
I'm not either.
But I had read about them. And I had read about the 1918 flu pandemic, and I had seen a talk show on pandemics about 15 years ago with a guy who'd written some books about what the fallout can be and how it can expose how fragile our society is and how fast things can really become unraveled. And thank goodness we've mostly been able to contain some of those really bad outcomes that can happen. But I'll never forget Mardi Gras Day, and I was down there at Gallier Hall. I'm with Lee and Kim, and they just started seeing some of those cases in Seattle and California. There was like the first 3 or 4 were confirmed out there. And I just looked around at all the people, and I said, this is coming here. I just said,
Yes.
I just, we didn't know what it was. We didn't even know how it was transmitted, that it was purely so airborne. But I just thought, this is not going to be good. And that must have been so scary that first month.
It was. The timeline just did not work in our favor with information. At the time, even up to Mardi Gras Day, it was still, we're doing what we can with travel restrictions. It's not going to come to the U.S. It's the flu. The flu kills more people. A lot of that messaging. And then what we saw was really the first confirmed community spread case was, I believe, on the West Coast on Mardi Gras Day. But it was clear that Mardi Gras was a super spreader incident for the city, and that probably from travel and tourism, unfortunately that did occur, but I will say on the high side that the community really responded when we asked them to. Once it became clear that New Orleans at one time, we had an extremely high spread rate and death rate, like globally. The community responded and did what they needed to do, and we really did crush the curve. And we've had some bumps in the road as a city and as a state and as a country with things popping back up again. But I remember working with the Department of Homeland Security and FEMA and having to order 20 refrigerated freezer semi-truck rigs. And I didn't have a place to store them, and we were fortunate enough to be able to find a location. But just what really put it in perspective for me, and this was because what was predicted to overrun the hospitals with fatalities, and seeing all of the 20 parked in a huge parking lot and knowing what they were for really was a point for me that put this entire thing into perspective. And if you didn't think it was real before, it just became crystal clear that our lives, this is going to define us for generations. And fortunately, we did not have to use all of those trucks. We did have to use some, fortunately, it was not the death was not as dire as we had been working at, or has it been predicted.
Yeah, and there was no way at the time to know it. You just had to plan the way you had to plan. Zach,
Correct.
You have been really, and Zach's been really involved in messaging and social media and just how we get out messages out over the air, whether it's hurricanes, the pandemic. Zach, why don't you talk a little bit about how we message for these things today? And I guess, Collin, will bring you in. I kind of want to get your take on, is everything easier now for you or for us because of social media and apps and things like that?
Yeah, because we have so much misinformation out there on social media. And, NOLA Ready is one of those great tools. Y'all are on Twitter, y'all are through the text messages, y'all have a website that you can go to. It's a great tool, especially with flooding, where we can literally go almost in live time and see how flooding is popping up on that map. But, maybe talk a little bit about, we struggle as meteorologists. Not only do we have to try and get the forecast right, but how do we message to the public? And the same story is from a emergency preparedness communication aspect. How do you message properly for every different type of event that can transpire? And like we've seen over the past 2 years, every event almost has transpired.
It's a double-edged sword because there is, you do have to be very careful with the veracity of some things you see on social media. We have had instances where people have used social media to show images of previous hurricanes and have promoted that as what's occurring right now. That becomes pretty clear to us, and we've got some pretty smart people that look at this. But one of the things that I noticed a few years ago and knew that this was going to social media was changing everything was we had a house collapse uptown. Nobody was injured, but we got a tweet about it 3 minutes before the first 911 call came in, and I'm like, this has power. That this is a force multiplier for us. And so, I have a great team. I have an incredible team that looks and works with these platforms and works with our alert system. And our whole goal is to have trust with the public. So, to put out the best information that we know when we know it, and when we've verified it, and we can say this is, to the best of our knowledge, which we know we're dealing a lot with weather, and I don't have to tell you guys, weather is very fickle. We've had numerous, we lift parking restrictions, we do these different things, and sometimes things don't turn out the way you thought they were going to. But at the same time, I want to make sure that a person doesn't lose their car. That's my goal. And I'd rather be more cautious with that than less cautious. And then you run this fine line of, am I over notifying people? Am I causing complacency by sending out too many messages? And so we really do try and focus on being as reliable as we can with the public. And I would add that we have this week debuted a new alerting system in the city. We're going with a new vendor called Rave Mobile Security. There's a lot of functionality there that we're going to be able to really, I think the public's going to be really happy with. What we're doing is asking people to text NOLA Ready, one word, NOLA Ready, to 77295 and get started with that. Anyone who is in our previous alert system will be migrated over and will be given the option to link in and keep going with this new provider. But we're really excited about it.
I'm already registered, Collin. I started getting the alerts,
Awesome.
And in fact, it's
Of
amazing.
course.
Was it yesterday the first day? Or the 2 days ago?
Pretty much. We were shooting for May 15th to be completely done and kind of transferred over. And I will give credit to our previous provider. They've been great with us. It's just we're moving on to a different system. But pretty much what you're saying is absolutely true. We've been testing the heck out of it over the last 2 days, and our new vendor is like.
So we had the boil water
I don't know if we
advisory,
know
the
what we're talking
tornado
here with New Orleans.
Exactly. I mean, we didn't even the boil water. Is the boil water advisory still going?
It is until this afternoon. It'll probably be cleared up, but. Yeah, the new vendor's kind of like, wow, you guys were serious, because we said you better be ready. I mean, it's New Orleans. We have constantly something going on, and we do the same thing for special events like Mardi Gras with our alerting. So it's only going to get bigger once we really start recovering and start getting back into special events in the fall.
Okay, a couple of things I'm going to close on here. Thoughts. We've had 40 inches of rain so far this year, double our typical.
Incredible.
And so at this time, are you just telling everyone to leave their car on the neutral ground for the rest of the year?
No. Parks and parkways will kill me. No. That is an issue. We love the neutral grounds and the green space we have and the tree canopy, but neutral ground parking tears those up. It has a tendency. Yeah. So we always ask people to be really careful when they're pulling on and off, because think about it, it's usually wet ground after. So when people leave the neutral ground, it tends to cause problems. So we try to use it as sparingly as possible. But it is an option when we enact it. We try to be really, as early as we can with it when we know that there's going to be some rain issues, because for people getting to work and their car is a lot of times their livelihood, and we understand that. Obviously flooding the house is a totally separate issue, but it is something that we care about as a government. We want to see people get through these things the best way possible.
Okay, and of course, your bio was sent over by your assistant, and I'm like, well, I guess I don't know everything about Collin. I see you're a licensed commercial pilot. I think that's interesting.
Yeah,
I mean, meteorologists, a lot of us are licensed pilots as well. I'm not, but I have several friends who are. So I don't know. Maybe you can take Zach up in a plane sometime.
I could. I actually am a flight instructor as well, and it's been part of my since childhood love of aviation, and really ability with the weather. As a pilot, your number one concern that you are looking at all the time is weather. So there's a lot of crossover between doing this job as emergency manager and working in the transportation field that relies heavily on having accurate weather. And so this job kind of makes you a weather nerd. I love looking at the weather. But that job as well, if it's bad, you can't fly, and that goes from the 747 down to the Cessna 152.
All right, well, you're in good company, Collin, as far as weather nerds go. Thanks so much for being on the podcast today. And let's hope we've reached the peak as far as disasters go around here, and maybe we can get a little bit of a break this season coming up. I hope so, and the pandemic
hope so. And
keeps improving.
But I really appreciate the opportunity to speak to both you and Zach, and over the years we've done a lot of stuff with hurricanes before the season and everything, and that's always open. It's good to see you guys.
Okay, you too. Thanks for coming on the program.
Thanks.
So there you have it, a man that has been very busy, and he has faced a lot of complicated scenarios over the last 2 years. And just like that, Zach, boom, June 1st is a couple of weeks away.
That it is, another hurricane season. But good news, I mean, there's a little bit of good news from this season, as the NOAA just declared that La Nina is no longer. Now we're going into a neutral phase. Now, many might be wondering, okay, what does that mean? We always talk about La Nina, El Nino. La Nina years with hurricanes usually produce a lot of hurricanes. We saw that last year. We had a very strong La Nina, and that's what happened.
I don't like La Nina. Okay, but what it looks like we're going to have, it does not look like we're going to have an El Nino. In fact, NOAA is saying the chance of an El Nino is only 8%, and El Nino tends to suppress Atlantic hurricane activity, except in, womp womp, the Gulf of Mexico. The Gulf of Mexico is kind of really immune from a lot of large-scale climate factors just because of where it's positioned in the basin and the way that we can get some of these storms developing. So we're probably going to be in a La Nada. Not a La Nina and not an El Nino. So I called it the big nothing, which means we'll be looking at other factors like dry air, wind shear, and ocean temperatures to determine what's ahead for the hurricane season. So, of course, we've got our hurricane special coming up in a couple of weeks. And on the podcast next week, we are bringing in the entire team. Okay, so that's going to be for episode 7. Obviously, we've only done 6 episodes. So, we're on episode 6 now. Yeah. Gotcha. So that'll be episode 7 next week. And we're going to have all 5 of us on. But
I was saying 5 of us. There's 5 of us coming on.
Oh, right. Yes, exactly. All 5. And all 5 who like to talk. So I think it should be a very lively conversation. We're going to be previewing our stories for Weathering the Storm 2021. Again, thanks for listening and thanks for watching. A reminder that you can get the podcast in the same place you get all your favorite podcasts. And if you aren't watching this and you want to, you can go to fox8live.com/David, and we have the video podcast version of this available there. For Zach Fradella, I'm David Bernard. Thanks for coming along.